Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Standard 9. We're going to be looking at the Civil War. We finally had the conflict between the North and South, the sectionalism that had been happening. We finally evolved into the gunfire and the cannons and the explosions and the destruction. Unfortunately, our country has been torn apart. Uh, let's take a look at the screen that you see and take a look at these charts. When the war begins, the North has a clear advantage over the South. And these charts show you this. Across the top, the bank deposits. So the amount of money in the bank, you see that the North has 81% of the amount of money in the bank, the South only 19%. You got to have money in order to fight a battle, and you see the North is well ahead of the South. Manufacturing plants, that's factories where you make boots, guns, bullets, tents, whatever you need to fight a war, you need a factory to make these things in. The North has 86% of the factories. That puts the South at a huge disadvantage. The workers in those factories, you see the North has 92% of the people to work in factories. Your factory is no good if nobody can work in it, and you see the North with a huge advantage over the South there. Well, what about the stuff you are making in the factories? Well, you've got to get it to where it needs to be, and you need railroad mileage in order to take it from point A to point B. And you see the North has 71% of the railroads. So the North, as you see, clearly has majority of the resources over the South, and therefore gives them a huge economic advantage over the South. What are they making in those factories? Take a look at the bottom charts. Manufactured goods, the stuff that they're being made, the North 90%. Firearms, very important if you're fighting a war. The North 97% in the North. And then railroad equipment is that third chart showing the North was a huge advantage over the South as well. So on paper, the North should be winning this war. It should have no problem winning the war, but unfortunately, it's not quite that easy, as we'll see as we move forward. So Standard 9a that we're looking at talks about the growing economic disparity between the North and South, and you see it's by far the North. They have the huge advantage over money in the bank, number of factories, people to work in factories, and railroad mileage to distribute the stuff made in factories. All right, so 9a, the economic disparity between the North and South. From the start, the Confederacy is at a huge advantage because of the graphs that you just saw. Take a look at this quote from Lincoln. Looking at Standard 9b, it talks about what Lincoln did as President of the United States in order to help win the war. And he took several decisive actions. But let's take a look first at what his quotes are, outlining his plan, his goal. And you see his paramount object in this struggle, the war, is to save the Union. And it is not either to save or destroy slavery. So he says his very first sentence right here saying, I am saving the Union. I'm not out to destroy slavery. And he goes on to say, if I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. If I could free the Union, but save the Union without freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others, I'd do that too. He's saying that he's not worried about slavery at the beginning here, is to save the Union. Keep that in mind as we move forward and see how his actions change. One of the first major things he does as president is suspends what's called habeas corpus, and it's something we all have today. In this chart, this little cartoon you see shows like what habeas corpus looks like when you take it away. You see some like dead bodies sitting in a prison. Well, that's kind of what he does. Habeas corpus is a legal protection we have saying that, if I were to get arrested, I have to go in front of a judge to prove that I've been legally, arrested. I'm being legally held. All right, that's my right of habeas corpus. Lincoln suspends it. And what he's trying to do is to silence and get rid of people who might be causing him and the Union, the United States, trouble during the war. Because in the North, there's a lot of people who are kind of friendly toward the Confederacy, the South, the states that seceded. Well, if they're friendly toward him, then they can be causing problems for the Union, and he doesn't want that. So he suspends habeas corpus. And take a look at number 4 here. Over 13,000 Northern Confederates were held without a trial, put in jail. No trial. That's highly controversial, and yet Lincoln thought he needed to do it in order to help win the war. And so he did. That's one of his war powers that a president has, is he can suspend habeas corpus, and that way take away some of the basic rights that citizens have and he does that to help win the war. 13,000 Northern Confederates held without a trial. The suspension of habeas corpus. You saw Lincoln's quote saying that if he could free all the slaves, he would. If he could free none, he would. Free some, free others, he would. His goal is to win the war. Slavery comes second. That's at the beginning of the war. Several years into the war, especially after the Battle of Antietam, he realizes that, you know what? I think we should free the slaves. I think this is going to help us win the war. And so he issues what's called the Emancipation Proclamation. Emancipation means freedom. Proclamation is like a legal announcement. And you see this image showing you different scenes of emancipation and slavery in turn. So Lincoln frees the slaves, but not all of them. He doesn't free all the slaves. Now, keep in mind, we don't have slavery in the North, but we do have it in the South, but not all Southern states seceded. Some Southern states where slavery is still legal and happening stayed in the North. Those are called the border states. Lincoln doesn't free those slaves. He frees the slaves that are only in the states that have seceded and joined the Confederacy. And the Confederation is saying, what do you mean you're freeing our slaves? We're not even part of your country anymore. You can't free our slaves. The slaves in those states didn't hear that. Those slaves heard that they were now free. And if I'm a slave and I'm in Georgia, for example, and I hear that I've been freed by Lincoln, I'm evacuating and leaving and escaping as first chance I get. Therefore, if you're a slave owner in these southern states, you're like, oh man, my slaves are about to escape. I can't go out fight on the battlefield. I've got to stay home and look after my slaves, look after my property, look after my family. So by freeing the slaves in the South, Lincoln has now caused a major distraction to the southern states and to the southern landowners and to the southern farmers who might have had slaves. Now they're not only focusing solely on winning the war for the South, now they're having to, do that, but also keep an eye on their slaves and their farms at home. He's just created a major distraction for the South by freeing the slaves only in the South. Not all the slaves, just the ones in Confederate states. That's his Emancipation Proclamation. And it was a pretty effective tool in helping win the war. So again, the Emancipation Proclamation, it did not free all the slaves, just the slaves in the Confederate South. And you can see Lincoln didn't expect the Confederate slaveholders to free their slaves. He knew they weren't. But the slaves, they're a whole lot more encouraged now to fight for their freedom, to escape to their freedom, and to cause trouble for their slave owners back home. African American slaves in the South understood what it was for now. They understood what was happening. And you know what? They're taking every chance they get to cause trouble for their Southern slave owners and to help the North as well. So that's your Emancipation Proclamation. Even with the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln's primary goal is still to win the war, to save the Union, save the United States. And it's after the Battle of Gettysburg where there's thousands of men killed on the battlefield, and so they turn the battlefield into a big cemetery. He shows up to give like a speech announcing, the burial of the soldiers. And so during his address at Gettysburg, he mentions several key things that kind of changes the scope of the war. He's saying that the soldiers have died in this battle at Gettysburg. They did not die in vain. Their lives were given in order to help save the Union, but also their lives were given in order to help freedom spread throughout the United States, saying that all men aren't currently equal like Thomas Jefferson had intended, but they're about to be, because slavery is going to end. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address shows that the slavery it's over. This war is now about slavery, the ending of slavery, and the only way to save the United States is to end slavery, and that's what he's saying at Gettysburg, at his Gettysburg Address. That begins with the famous line, 7 years ago, one of the greatest speeches in our history. That's Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And that was his primary goal of the Gettysburg Address. So Lincoln was elected in 1860, if you remember. His election in 1860 is what caused the southern states to finally secede, which led immediately almost to the Civil War. All right, well, Lincoln gets reelected. especially after the Battle of Atlanta. It's clear that the North's going to win. So he gets reelected in 1864. And when he's inaugurated for the second time, he gives another speech, another address. And it's during the second inaugural address where he outlines kind of what the war was about, excuse me, and what the plan is moving forward to save and put together, back together the United States. So he was saying that slavery is evil. This war was about slavery. We are going to reunite the nation once this war is over. And you know what? Southern states, when you come back in, Southern leaders, when you come back in, you're not necessarily going to be punished. He's saying that we have had way too much conflict ever since, the Missouri Compromise, 1820. We're in 1864 now. So for 44 years, nothing but conflict, and it's time to stop. It's time for it to end. And so the famous line coming from his second inaugural address is, with malice toward none. We're not going to be hard on anybody necessarily coming back in. Lincoln outlines his plan for Reconstruction during the second inaugural address, and he lays out his plan and shows that we have a plan to reunite the country. Slavery's done. As soon as this war is over, slavery is not going to continue, and that's all what he outlines in his second inaugural address. All right, we're going to stop here. When we pick it back up tomorrow, we're going to talk about not just Abraham Lincoln, but the leaders of the Union, and we'll pick it up from there. Thank you, everybody.